Speaker, it takes a special type of incompetence to spend 50% more on the bureaucracy, yet have the largest public service strike in 40 years. It takes a special type of incompetence to not only have passport delays, but also delays in immigration processes, as well as tax returns. And it takes a special type of incompetence to spend $22 billion on outside consultants and still end up in the same strike position. Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister apologize for his incompetence and end this strike?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Unlike the Conservatives opposite, we respect collective bargaining, we respect the right to strike, and we understand that negotiations need to happen at the negotiating table. Mr. Speaker, our government has been extraordinarily engaged to ensure that we get a fair deal for Canadians, a fair deal for the workers, and a fair deal for government. Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to negotiate in good faith and to ensure that we can continue to serve Canadians in such an effective way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Minister is part of the problem. Mr. Speaker, this is a Prime Minister that never shows up. He doesn't show up for work, and he certainly doesn't show up for Canadians. It's no wonder that both rents and mortgages have doubled. It is no wonder that 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals, and it's no wonder that right outside these doors we have the largest public service strike in 40 years. So when will this Prime Minister show up to work and fix what he broke?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Speaker, the members on this side show up to work every single day to work for Canadians.
7 days a week.
And Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the public servants who did show up to work every single day throughout the pandemic to deliver CERB to 8.5 million Canadians. Let's talk about the public servants who worked overtime to make sure that they could help Canadians access the services that they needed. Mr. Speaker, we respect collective bargaining. We respect the right to strike. We respect the fact that we are at the negotiating table having hard conversations, but at the end we're going to get a good deal for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Exactly.
This Prime Minister is spending $21 billion more on the public service than when he took office. And it takes a special kind of incompetence to spend 50% more on the bureaucracy, but to give Canadians worse service with 150,000 workers out on strike, the largest public sector strike in 40 years. How will this Prime Minister fix the government and public service that he has broken?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, public servants and the Public Service Alliance of Canada provide services that are important to Canadians, valuable services, and one which and the government certainly values their work. We are committed to reaching an agreement with the Public Service Alliance of Canada that is fair to government employees and also reasonable for Canadians. There is a competitive deal on the table, and I'm really proud to say, Mr. Speaker, that both parties are continuing to negotiate in good faith, and Canadians expect both parties to reach an agreement.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Why doesn't the Prime Minister stand up and answer? I'll tell you why. Because this Prime Minister won't stand up for Canadians. He won't stand up for Canadians who are stuck in passport.
Hold on a sec here. Okay, I'm doing two things at the same time, and I apologize for that. Just we need to make sure we can't say if somebody's in the chamber or not in the chamber. So the Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Why doesn't this Prime Minister stand up to answer the question? He won't stand up because he won't stand up for Canadians. He won't stand up for Canadians who are stuck in passport lines. He won't stand up for Canadians who are stuck in airports, and he won't stand up for the 700 men and women in uniform who are without heat and hot water as a result of his failures. So when will this Prime Minister finally stand up for Canadians and fix what he's broken?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, in spite of your admonition and trying to encourage the member not to do indirectly that he can't do directly, it's almost symbolic of how they treated the public service when they were in government, Mr. Speaker. Public servants remember very well how the Conservatives had had abrogated their rights, provided terrible working conditions, and got no value for it. This government believes in public service. We believe in good faith negotiations. We are there and we're providing important services to Canadians, as Canadians saw through the pandemic, as they saw through many things that have, through the things that will help us deal with the current inflation. This is good news for Canada, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rita Lakes.
This government would call the largest public service strike in 40 years good news for Canadians. Long lines at our passport offices, good news for Canadians. Record delays at our airports, good news for Canadians. Or say that having hundreds of men and women in uniform at CFB Petawawa without heat and hot water because of their incompetence, good news for Canadians. But they're not in it for Canadians, and that's exactly why this morning, when we tried to call Alexandre Trudeau from the Trudeau Foundation to committee to talk about how he signed for a $200,000 check from Beijing as part of an influence operation to get access to this Prime Minister, which they did in fact get, they sent their Liberals in to block it. When will they stand up for Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the question of what happened at the committee today, committees, as you know, Mr. Speaker, are of course masters of their own destiny. The committee chose not to go forward and support what the Conservatives had brought forward. It was unanimous, with the exception of the Conservatives, to not go forward with that because, Mr. Speaker, we have important things to discuss, and it was not to engage in these drive-by smears that the Conservatives like to engage in.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The Prime Minister wrote a long letters to public servants in 2015, promising to negotiate with them in good faith. Yet he's the only Prime Minister in the past 40 years who hasn't successfully negotiated with them. The worst is that this Prime Minister has a really unique and special type of incompetence, because in 8 years he managed to increase the cost of the public service by 50%. That's $21 billion. And yet he was unable to prevent the strike of 155,000 employees. So how does he justify this monumental failure? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we feel that public servants do very important work for Canadians. We agree that they have the right to strike if they are legally able to do so. What's important, though, Mr. Speaker, is to have the chance to negotiate in good faith. And thus far, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we've done. Unlike, Mr. Speaker, when the Conservatives were in power, they prevented public servants from using their right to strike. They forced them to return to work. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Prime Minister to stand up and address his incompetence. He has never had to strike. He's never had to wait in line to get a passport. He's never been worried about whether or not he'll be able to take a vacation in Jamaica. He's never had to wait in line in an airport because he travels by private jet. He never had to worry about the end of the month because he never had to draw up a budget for himself. So when will the Prime Minister finally get to work to solve all the problems that he's created over the past 8 years, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, we are in a situation where the public servants are legally allowed to call a strike. That's important to note. It's also important to note that both parties, the union management and the employer, are negotiating in good faith. Negotiations are going well, Mr. Speaker. We, unlike the Conservatives, will let negotiations continue.